911 operators of Reddit, what are some of the funniest things someone has called in for? I once called 911 because I hit my finger and wanted to talk to my mom, who was a dispatcher. I called crying, asking to talk to her by name. She was more pissed at my dad for not waking up when I tried to go to him first. Story 2. Numerous calls where someone has handcuffed themselves and lost the key. If it's not busy, this seems to draw most available officers. Not me, but a coworker. A person was pleasuring themselves with the handle of a scissors and it got stuck. Story 3. Was a 911 operator before becoming a paramedic. Had a lot of funny ones, but by far my favorite involved an all too common problem of a kid getting a hold of a locked cell phone and only being able to dial 911. It was Father's Day, mind you. Had this particular kid, about 5 years old, call in at least 6 times, but he'd never stay on the line long enough for us to get a good ping on his cell phone. It was probably about 10 p.m. Local at the time, not early, but not too late in the night. Long story short, we were finally able to get him to stay on the phone long enough by talking about how his teddy bear was sick. We asked to speak to his parents, and he told us they were in bed and the door was locked. So we asked him to go knock on the door. He then told us he had been locked in his room. Okay, I think we know what's going on now. By this point, we had an officer route to this kid's house to go make sure everything was okay and to tell his parents the kid has been calling 911. The officer arrives on scene. A few minutes go by, then the officer comes over the radio and says, "As 120 back in service. The teddy bear is 10 to 4 inches. The officer made his way up to the comm center and proceeded to tell us all that the kid's dad answered the door wearing only boxer shorts and was more than a little agitated when he found out his son had been calling 911. Apparently, the dad had been getting his Father's Day gift from mom when the officer showed up. Story 4. Had a grown man calling in about a monster trying to get into his son's room. He's the right kind of frantic where I know it's not a mental health crisis, but I still couldn't figure it out. Well, he's a Middle Eastern male with a real thick accent, and I was having a hard time understanding. So he gave the phone to his son. The monster had climbed a tree and was at his bedroom window, and it was as big as his dog. And it has hands like him, but tiny. Wait, what? Right there, I told the kid to see if it had rings on his tail. Yes. They had just moved to America a month ago and had never heard of raccoons. I couldn't mute myself fast enough, and the father heard me laughing. I think that's what helped calm him down. I explained what a trash panda was and welcomed him to our wild jungle. Story 5. A little kid called 911 because he wanted the cops to come arrest his brother. You see, their mom said that the caller's brother was supposed to share the Legos, but he wasn't sharing. The caller's brother said that he was playing with all of the Legos, which wasn't possible. There were too many Legos for one person to play with all of them at once, argued our caller. Therefore, his brother was a liar, a git, and a turd, and we needed to come and arrest him. We had a high degree of confidence that this wasn't a coded request for help, so we asked to speak to an adult, confirmed that there was no distress, and closed the case. Share your Legos, kids. Story 6. A man requiring extrication from an Under Armour insulated shirt. His shoulder popped out of the socket while he was pulling it on. It was halfway on, halfway off, and his arm was locked and dislocated. He was laughing and said, "I would have driven myself to the hospital, but I would have had to drive with my arm out the window." Story 7. I was a 911 dispatcher years ago, but had 2 call-specific calls that still make me laugh. 1. A frazzled mother called because her 6-year-old had gotten into the roof and she couldn't get him down. She kept screaming about how we need to hurry, not because she was worried he would get hurt, but because he had done the before and last time he peed in the air vents. 2. This was before weed was legal in my state, but a college kid called asking for an ambulance. He was super worried that he was having an allergic reaction to the weed he just smoked. When asked about his symptoms, he said, "I just can't stop eating Cheetos." Story 8. My dad used to be in charge of the 911 call center. One particular story I remember was in like 09, some guy called asking how much weed he could have in his car while driving through the state. They went back and forth for maybe 20 minutes of the guy repeating and rephrasing the question, and my dad just responding, "None." Story 9. I briefly worked as a 911 operator. When someone called on the non-emergency line, we always answered the same way. "Blank police and fire, this is a recorded line. How can I help you?" We get a call on that line. I answer as usual, and a very inebriated-sounding woman asks the following. Hypothetically speaking, if my boyfriend had a few grams of CK and I called the police to tell them about it, would either of us get into any trouble? Ma'am, you're calling the police on a recorded line. I know, but what does the law say? I don't know, ma'am. I'm not a police officer. Would you like me to send one? Yes, please. She gives me her address. An officer responded, but there were no arrests. That one had me scratching my head. Story 10. My sister once called because she wanted to know who would be on the other end of the line. I couldn't hear what the person said, but I heard my sister's parts of the convo. "Sister, hello? Who's this?" "Oh," and she hung up on the operator. They ended up calling back, and my dad picked up and had to explain that his daughter was just being curious. Story 11. Not me, but my wife, who works both as a secretary for a fire department and is a volunteer firefighter. A lady calls asking if she can donate a building for a training burn-in. After asking questions, she finds out it's not a building, but an RV. More questions. It's not her RV, it was abandoned on her property. Just a few more questions. It's not exactly abandoned. It's her ex-husband's RV and he's living in it and won't leave. She wants my wife's fire department to burn it down. Wife's fire department declined. Story 12. Actual 911 operator here. So far, the silliest was a guy who called, all concerned about the number of birds flying around because there was an air show nearby, and he was worried the planes would hit the birds. Story 13. I had a guy call in on 911 because he was concerned about a seagull he thought was injured in a Chipotle restaurant parking lot. Apparently, while on the phone, he tried to pick up or check on the bird, at which point the bird started squawking. Then he started freaking out, and I started having trouble telling them apart. Then there I could hear what might have been wings flapping. A brief silence. And suddenly the guy started hyperventilating and screaming. He needed an ambulance because he was having a heart attack and that the bird flew off. I wasn't sure if he was being serious, so I got him over to EMS as a precaution. Upon transfer and getting EMS on the line, he got very quiet and said, "I think I'm okay, I'll call you back later," and hung up and would not answer on callback. I still wonder about Steven Seagal when I drive by a Chipotle. Story 14. A guy calls my agency every so often talking about murdering gummy bear dinosaurs and something about strawberry tampons. Story 15. I am not a dispatcher. But when I was a child and like 6, I called the police from the home phone and asked if they would come play with me because I didn't have friends. So they showed up, because they have to respond. And I got a lecture from the police and my military parents about the seriousness of calling 911. Story 16. I just certified as a call taker and got mandated for overtime, of course, on my first shift. Policy was if someone insisted they saw something, we take it as face value and enter the call. Well, this lady called me just after midnight and swore she saw a chupacabra on the west side of Orlando and insisted in an officer doing an area check. Not too long after that, a coworker was in on his night off and left the building. He called 2 minutes later saying he saw a kangaroo hopping down the street. I can't make this crap up. Story 17. Lady called in because she thought Willie Nelson was having a cardiac arrest in her trailer and she needed an ambulance. I started giving her CPR instructions and come to find out when paramedics got there, she was doing compressions on the couch cushions. Story 18. Sil took a call from someone named Ruben Martinez and she thought it was a prank call. She thought it was a prank call because she heard rubbing my junk rather than the caller's name, Ruben Martinez. Story 19. Not a 911 operator, but during residency, they had us shadow one during my ambulance month. This woman called 911 3 times in 10 minutes for a service animal in a mall. He's here staring at me. No, I don't care that he's helping. He just licked his balls. Story 20. A guy called in because his dog had bitten a seagull and was now acting strange. He demanded we find the bird, capture it, and test it for rabies. The whole circumstances were vague, and he was unwilling to listen to reasonable advice, like that birds can't carry rabies. He had the audacity to file a complaint when informed we would not be doing what he wanted. Story 21. There are funny calls that come in all the time. I talked to a pizza delivery guy who couldn't reach his destination because a defiant chicken was standing in the middle of the road. I stayed with him on the phone as he pleaded with it to finally move along. Truly a chicken crossing the road moment. Another time I took a call where a guy insisted he was in an argument with a man dressed as a giant Pepsi bottle. He said the man in the Pepsi suit had stolen his debit card and refused to give it back. Upon arrival, the officers told me he was high and arguing with a vending machine. Story 22. A friend had cops called on him because he was doing liquid at the train station. It's a form of dancing at raves where your hands seem to look like liquid. The person who called the cops was scared it was satanic or something. Story 23. Caller called because they got their head stuck in a cat tree, with the cat stuck inside with it. Throughout the call, I kept hearing like, "Ow, damn," and "Dude, this isn't fun for me either." "Dude, I know damn." "Dude." Caller ended up going to the hospital for a minor case of serious head lacerations. The other cool thing was that the caller was using an Apple Watch to call 911, because obviously they wouldn't be able to hold the phone to their ear. We get about a dozen misdials from Apple Watches a day. It was nice to finally see one being used for real. Story 24. One time a guy called in while I was training and stated he had hit his junk. When I answered, "You hit your junk?" the trainer smacked me on the arm and told me he said he'd hit his hand. She looked at me like the biggest pervert. Then 10 seconds later into the conversation, he says, "Yeah, I was trying on a rubber that was too small and I had to cut it off, so I hit right into my junk." She almost couldn't stop herself from laughing. Story 25. So I work in the dispatch center for a department that serves a city whose population is just shy of a milli. So we get a crap ton of calls every day. Naturally, you'll get some wild stories about scams, especially these days. Because of this, you quickly become numb to some of the mental gymnastics that people do when they rationalize to me why they sent the IRS $5,000 worth of Best Buy gift cards that had to be purchased from 5 different Best Buy stores. Half the stories give me a chuckle, but overwhelming majority of them just cause me to feel bad for the person because I know they're not getting any of that money back, which brings me to a call that I took last year. A younger woman calls in. She had to be in her late 20 or early 30. Story starts off like a run-of-the-mill scam, you know. Someone called her from the FBI, saying that she had a warrant out for her arrest and that she could clear her name if she sent them money. Well, how much money did they ask for Biracial Angel? They told her that all of the money in her checking account would suffice. That's correct. Whatever amount of money she had would do. So that's what she sent, which amounted to about $4,000. But wait, there's more. After feeling bad for her, gathering some additional information, and beginning to let her know reporting options and whatnot, she cuts me off, she says. Well, what can I do about the verification pictures? And I'm like, what are you talking about? She said, well, yeah, they said they needed to verify my identity through their body verification system. So I sent them several nude photos like they asked me to. Pictures from the front, the side, and from the back while I was bending over. I was absolutely stunned. She had to do a quintessential, you there, into the phone, so I could come back to damn reality for a moment. At this point, I thought I was the one getting ducked with. But she was bawling her eyes out at this point, so I made no assumptions, other than the fact that there was probably even more to the story, which there damn was. Like a respectful kid listening to a bedtime story, I'm just damn like, and then what happened? She proceeds to tell me that they then threatened to send the photos to her friends and family if she didn't pay them more money. How much money? You might be asking? In true FBI body verifying agent form, they doubled down and said all she had in her savings account would be enough, which was $25,000. I'm just sitting there in my chair like, please no, but she did. And I've considered getting into the scamming business ever since. Story 26. I used to compile these, so here's some of my calls of the day. These are all genuine calls to 911 I've personally taken in my jurisdiction. There is a man with dreads and blue Superman pants laying in the middle of the roadway. Another caller clarifies, they are actually pizza pants. You're a little person who got mad at your pizza man for not wearing a mask to deliver your food, so you confronted him outside and he ran you over. Then the medical dispatcher mistook you for a woman on the phone and you got even more upset. Your adult daughter won't turn up the thermostat and you're cold. Your backyard neighbor has been loudly singing in their yard for the last 40 minutes. During the call, they stop singing and start barking for some reason. Someone just stole an entire rotisserie chicken from the Spanish supermarket and ran away with it stuffed under their arm. A spider bit your boob 3 weeks ago and you kept picking at the bite, and now it's worse and now you want an ambulance. There are 2 10-year-old boys harassing the ducks at the park near the bench where you like to read your Bible. Your boyfriend threw an ottoman at your head. According to you, your neighbor has been taking too many pills from the government. He needs to eat more fruits and vegetables. There is a turkey failing to scale a retaining wall near the highway. Your ex put an entire Snickers bar in your gas tank and ran away. Your substances dealer took your money and hasn't come back outside. You've decided you're just not going to buy from him anymore. A man broke into your house and ran off carrying a pie. Yesterday, someone broke into your house and stole things including your smartwatch. You went over today to visit your ex and suddenly your smartwatch paired with your phone. You owed thousands of dollars of back rent to your roommates after you moved out. Now you've returned a month later, devastated to learn your old roommate licensed your cat in your absence. You asked your neighbor why he was in your driveway earlier. He said it was his driveway and flashed a submachine gun at you. A woman has stolen traffic cones from a nearby construction site, placed them around herself in the middle of the road, and is now spinning in place, occasionally saluting. You ran over a handgun with your lawnmower, the front porch eating a pancake. Story 27. At the time, this wasn't funny, but hindsight and all. It's Thanksgiving Day morning, and I've just started my shift around 5 a.m. I'm the only one working for the day shift and settle in for what should be a mostly peaceful day of hanging out, eating food, playing New Vegas, and relaxing. Then my 911 line rings. I pick it up and go through the usual rundown, only to be greeted not by someone with a medical emergency, a fire, crime in progress, nothing like that. She needed help with making a turkey. I told her this was an emergency line, and she informed me this was an emergency because she had family coming over that night, and she had to do Thanksgiving dinner. I apologize for her problem, but inform her it's not an actual emergency, so I need to clear the line. And yes, I went through our procedures to check to see if this was a domestic issue or something like that, where the individual couldn't speak freely. This was not that. She calls back a few minutes later and hangs up upon realizing it is me. She calls back again, gets me, and I inform her it's only me working, so this won't work. Before I can tell her that Lay will come out to her location next time she hangs up. About 10 minutes later, she calls again, pitching a sob story about her Thanksgiving being ruined and needing help to salvage it for her family. I let her know Lay is on their way. She tries to call it like I'm bluffing until I read back her address, so she hangs up. Lee arrives, and she plays dumb like she has no idea why they are there. But everything is recorded, and we've had her number and address ping with every call. She gets a verbal, and they leave only for her to call me back to chew me out for sending Lee to her home and scaring her kids, so she wants to talk to my supervisor to file a complaint. Shockingly, this didn't get her very far, but it did get Lee back out to her place to actually issue her a citation for abusing 911 and tying up the lines. Monday morning, she called 911 again to complain about me and again got another citation. Then there was the boy who called because his older brother climbed on the roof, couldn't get down, and so he panicked, dialed 911 so we could get his brother down before mom and dad got home. The brother was apparently planning to jump to the trampoline but chickened out and couldn't climb back down. Mom and dad came home while the fire department was getting him down. They weren't happy. Story 28. I called 911 today to report a brush fire near downtown Seattle. Here's the call in its entirety. Ring. Tired-sounding dispatcher. 911. Are you calling to report the brush fire on I-5 by the 520 bridge exit? Me. Yes. Tired-sounding dispatcher. We got it. Click. I was kind of impressed. I was on a mobile phone, but he had to have had a general pin on my location. Story 29. Not me, but my dad. He gets a call from an old lady saying she can't find her husband's gun. He asks, "Where did you see it last?" And she goes, "Well, I wanted to hide it from my husband, so I put it in the toaster. And then I donated the toaster to a thrift store." So, ma'am, you put the gun in the toaster, then donated said toaster to a store? Yes, I did. Well, ma'am, I can't. He help you with that. Toaster of doom, we like to call it. Story 30. I had a kid calling from a non-service phone. It's a phone that no longer has a subscription attached to it. Although you can't call anyone else, it can still be used to call 911. The problem is that it's untraceable, and this little git knew it. Me. 911, where's your emergency? Him. What's up, duckface? Me. 911, where's your emergency? Him. What's up, duckface? Me. 911, where's your emergency? Him. What's up, duckface? Finally, I said, "We have triangulated your position. The police are on the way." After a brief silence, he said, "No, they isn't duckface." Story 31. I have a fun story. My brother is a 9-11 operator in the area where we live. One day I was at the store with my son, and I gave him my phone to play with. Well, he accidentally called 911, and my brother coincidentally is the one who got the call. I guess my son just wanted to talk to his uncle that day. Story 32. No longer a 911 operator, but I had two. First one when a young man realized what happens to some women during the first time. He thought he poked something and hurt her. Second was when a man and a woman were getting hot and heavy. He ended up getting junk stuck inside of a Gatorade bottle. Getting his junk stuck wasn't funny. It's a serious medical concern and could result in emergency surgery, but his yelling in the background about how he could have just asked for a blowjob and she would have given it literally killed me throughout the call. Two more. I had another one where an escort butt dialed me. I was new to the sheriff's office at the time and thought she was in distress with the moans I heard on the phone. That was the welcome to this job call. It used to be very frequent back in the 2010s because holding a key would call 911 on your phone. There was also a man named Wayne who would call and tell us the craziest stories in existence. Many of them were funny, but ultimately it was sad at the same time as we were the only people who would pick up when he called. Story 33. A fairly regular emergency for me here in NY State is very young men, usually teenagers or university-age men who have inserted objects inside and cannot retrieve them. Typically carrots, small pumpkins, but sometimes also torches, doors, or acorns. When you buy a sex toy from Adult Shop, the toy usually has flanges on one end. That prevents the object from getting pulled in beyond the sphincter and disappearing inside where it cannot be reached by fingers. This is a very traumatic and also embarrassing emergency for the young men. Story 34. Not a 911 operator, but an ex-ambulance. Got an unknown call. Arrived on scene. Husband came running at us screaming, "Chicken breath, chicken breath." Turned out his wife couldn't breathe due to an allergy. Chicken breath will always be referred to as shortness of breath calls. While working my clinicals in the ER, a guy came in with a glass Coke bottle stuck in his ass. Bless his heart. Story 35. I've had people call in for nightmares several times. Can't help you in your sleep, sorry. Story 36. My time to shine. What time is it? What day is it? Was that an earthquake? Are those fireworks or are my neighbors high again and shooting at cans in the yard? Asterisk, can you make my teenage son wake up and go to school? Can you take me to Taco Bell? My license got taken away for a do I asterisk. My sister took my cell phone. Can you get it back for me? She's 11. Is that cute cop that arrested me last week working today? Can I talk to him? Are you real or are you a robot? I'm real. Well then tell me a joke so I know you're not lying, asterisk. Do you recommend working there? I'll need a job when I get out of the halfway house. Asterisk, is it true all cops eat donuts? Can I sue you if your dog bites me? Am I still in America? Yes, this Alaska. We're a state. Really. These are but a very few that have come in through my 14 years as a 911 dispatcher. Story 37. Woman screaming that an ambulance was following her with their lights on. Spoiler, the ambulance was not following her. Asking the caller for the description of the man she's fighting with. He's ugly. Thanks, ma'am. Very descriptive. Story 38. Coworker of mine received a call from a guy standing in front of our police headquarters. Said he was watching people have sex in a car parked on the street. He then decided to tell us he was watching it, but that it was disgusting to watch. But he continued to watch. Stated that if we ran lights and sirens to catch them, he would turn in his substances to make them stop. Somehow or another, the caller started to pleasure himself to them having sex. Oddly enough, happens a fair amount right in front of headquarters. Story 39. I called the non-emergency police line once for my across-the-way neighbor playing Christmas music at all hours for 7 months straight. Turns out I live next to a deaf building and the person had no idea that their music was 1, playing 24 hours a day. 2, so loud I could hear it in any room of my apartment across the driveway. The operator was absolutely cracking up because I was like, look, it's July. I can't take hearing Holy Night again. The callback I got when they made contact with the person was absolutely hilarious. The cop couldn't stop chuckling every few words. Story 40. There are 2 birds, sandhills cranes, fighting on my front lawn. The water on my road is too high, hurricane season, and people are driving through it. Story 41. Our county sheltered several evacuees from Hurricane Katrina. Some were placed in a motel and meals were brought to them. One lady called 911 because her chicken was cold. Story 42. My caller reported her car stolen. When I asked her when she saw her car for the last time, she replied 1990. Yep, 30 years ago. She seemed unfazed on why I was surprised by her answer. Story 43. Not a dispatcher, but I did get dispatched by them. My favorite call was when my pager went off and I read aloud, "Woman bit by camel." We were working in Malibu. Story 44. Indecent exposure going down 75. Dude was getting a BJ while driving and the caller was describing both of them. My trainer at the time was an elderly man. He was a beast. And he had to keep muting himself from laughing. The officers on the other side of the radio were audibly losing their crap, as well as the descriptions kept on coming. Story 45. I had a sweet-sounding older lady call because people were setting off fireworks and she was concerned the wildlife would get scared and get hit by a vehicle. When I told her that the fire department was being sent to check it out, she got furious, saying she didn't want the fire department, that it was a waste of taxpayers' dollars, and that she would never call again. Story 46. It is one of my favorite calls from one of our local crazies. She told me that she needed an ambulance because her hand was stuck inside of her and she couldn't get it out. She kept telling me, "I didn't put it there, someone else did." The best part was when I asked for her location and she gave me an intersection instead of an address and said she was standing on the corner. In my mind, I was thinking there is no way this woman is standing on the corner in broad daylight, elbow deep in her own lady bits. The medics called me later and advised that she was indeed standing on the corner with her sweatpants around her ankles and her whole hand inside. There were also about 8 spectators there taking in the show. I've had a lot of fun calls involving this lady. She is one of my favorite frequent flyers. Story 47. When I was a kid, I called 911 a couple times and hung up because I had learned about it at school and wanted to teach my baby sister. The cops came out because of the multiple hang-ups. They were nice. My mom was annoyed. It's a cute story in our family. Story 48. Former dispatcher here. My funniest call was a guy called in and said he wanted to report a pig running around. I had to ask a pig, as in curly-tailed pig. He said, "Yes, sir, he's running by Taco Bell now." I dispatch out animal control, who gets on scene and asks for help. One of our officers assists, and for the next 40 minutes or so, I got to listen to 2 of the city's finest chase a young pig around businesses. Once the pig was finally caught, it was determined the pig came from a transport truck. The driver said he didn't want the pig back, so the pig was given to the Humane Society. Never did hear what happened to the little fellow after that. Story 49. I once got a call from a lady who was whispering in a hushed, terrified voice. I immediately was on full alert, wondering if she was hiding from a domestic or a break-in. But no. Imagine the following in the most terrified whisper you can get. "There's a deer outside." "A deer?" "Yes, please come." "Okay, so what is the deer doing?" "It's just standing there. Please, you have to hurry." I asked a few more questions, completely confused. The deer wasn't stuck, it wasn't injured, it wasn't sick. It was just standing there in the backyard, terrifying this woman. I asked if she had tried to scare it off, yell at it, flick the backyard light on maybe. She yelled that no, of course not. She was terrified that if she made any noise or movement, she would enrage the deer and it would break through her sliding glass door and attack her. I sent the officer because she insisted. The deer ran away when it heard the officer's car pulling up. Because, it's a deer. The life of the terrified woman who apparently had never seen a deer before was saved. Runners up. The guy who called to try to get my permission for him to go into work even though he had COVID. I told him to stay home. The woman who wanted the police to catch a mouse in her kitchen. The woman calling in a suspicious male parked in front of her house. He had been parked in front of her house, staring through her window for hours. bare feet on the dash, typing furiously on a laptop. Turned out to be a private investigator who was very bad at his job. A man calling about geese crossing the road. He was very angry about these geese. He demanded to know why the police didn't stop geese from crossing the road. He was from Philadelphia, he said, and Philly police are much better at geese. I don't know what kind of outfit you're running out here, with uncontrolled geese all over the place, but Philly police would have already taken care of this. Just letting you know. Story 50? Here is my favorite one. I work in a moderately sized suburb. While it is rapidly expanding, lots of people don't realize how much wildlife is sharing their neighborhood. I took a 911 call from a gentleman that stated he has lion cubs in his backyard. There was a larger one and 2 babies, and they had stripes. He also made a point to tell me that he didn't know how they had gotten into his backyard because he has a 6-foot privacy fence. Now, many people also don't know that bobcat kittens have stripes that fade as they age. He has a bobcat mama and kittens in his backyard. My agency doesn't send anyone, police or animal control, if wildlife is outside doing wildlife things. Then he uttered the phrase all dispatchers know, "But I have kids." It never fails, no matter the call. What about the children? The caller eventually watched Mama lead her kittens from the yard through a loose panel in his fence. Out next 911 call was from the neighbor because a bobcat with kittens is chasing a rabbit in my front yard. Story 51. Someone legit called me today to say, some guy has a pet rock and he almost got hit by a car collecting his pet from the roadway. I have so many every day. Story 52. I'm not an operator, but my mom called for a ridiculous reason once. I had just moved out at the tender age of 19 and lived halfway across the states from my parents. I was eating fried chicken with my then boyfriend when a piece of sharp bone broke off and went down my throat. I was rather sheltered and also had high anxiety. I was at least 80% sure this was fatal, but I had no money and no insurance. So of course I wasn't about to put myself into life, crippling debt over the 20% chance it wasn't. So who did I call? My mom, of course. I don't know why, she didn't know a lot of things, but I just needed my mom. Anyway, neither of us knew, but I thought we determined that it was most likely going to be okay, and that was that. Nope. I got a call 15 minutes or so later from someone wanting to see if I was okay. It was about 12 years ago, so I don't remember exactly who called, but it turned out that my mom called 911 after hanging up the phone. That's right, she called her local emergency line about her daughter who swallowed a chicken bone, but was otherwise okay in an entirely different state. I was so embarrassed, but looking back, I guess it was really cute. She has passed away since then, but I remember the story fondly. Story 53. There are way too many to choose from, but the first one that came to mind was a male in his 20s calling the police on his father because he was being unreasonable and refusing to go to church. Any call where you think you have a body and try to start CPR only to realize the caller was hallucinating the whole thing is right up there, though. The stories, not laughing at the person for likely having a mental illness and needing help. Story 54. It was Thanksgiving, and I had to work mandatory overtime due to call-offs. I was sitting next to a buddy, and a lady called in to report loud music. The call is getting wrapped up, and she asks, the caller, how are you doing today? Me thinking my mic is muted, and the caller can't hear me look over to my buddy and say, me, well, it's Thanksgiving, and I'm here talking about your neighbor's loud music, so how the duck do you think I'm doing? Followed by an eye roll and about the stupidest attempt at a joke I could make. Caller laughs right. Me frantically grasping for mute switch, which I realize has in fact not been muted me. Can you hear me right now? Caller, yes. Long pause on both our parts. Me, well, I'm going to be real honest with you, ma'am. I thought my mic was muted when I said that, and I'm very sorry. I was trying to make a joke to a colleague, and Okay, you don't have to explain. I get it. Just tell my neighbors to keep it down. Me, yes, ma'am, we'll get somebody out there. Caller, thank you for what you do. I honestly didn't think about you guys having to be away from your families. But seriously, thank you. Me now on the verge of tears. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Caller giggles and can barely get out. Now tell my neighbors to shut the duck up. Both laugh uncontrollably for several minutes before wishing each other a happy Thanksgiving. I never got a complaint, and it never got picked up in an audio audit. The officers handled the call with no issues. As far as I'm aware, me, my buddy, and the caller are the only ones to this day that know. Story 55. My uncle was a dispatcher in Chicago. He used to laugh at people who called 911 in blizzards because someone took the spot that dug out on the public street. Parking spaces are business in Chicago winter. Story 56. Not an operator, but my grandfather was a sheriff's deputy that filled in occasionally for the 911 operator in our small Texas county. One day, my grandfather was at the phones when our address and phone number popped up on his screen. He answered expecting the worst. The call went like this. 911, Grandpa. 911, what's your emergency? Child. Crying, he said. The S word. 911. Who said the S word? Child. My brother. He told me to shut up. 911. Oh no, he's going to be in lots of trouble. Please put your grandmother on the phone, okay? Story 57. I would really like to know what the conversation was on the other end of a call I received from 911. I had a stalker at the time who frequently woke me up in the middle of the night, banging on my windows. He lived so close, we were able to figure out who he was, that by the time police responded, he would be tucked in at home. I kept apologizing for making them come out, but they told me to keep calling, so they would have a record. Anyway, one morning I got a call from 911 dispatch. In reviewing the calls the night before, they saw one they thought might have been a partial dial from me, and they were calling to make sure I was okay. I really appreciated that. Story 58? This story sounds made up, but multiple students I trust, the teacher and school admin, have all confirmed it to me. A teacher at the school I teach at Butt dialed 911 during class. He just happened to be teaching his chemistry class how to make meth while he did so. Apparently, he didn't realize it until the office called into his room and asked him to come to the receptionist's desk because there was a cop there responding to his call. He got the cop to cuff him, walk him back into his classroom, and say, "This is why you don't even think about making meth." Story 59. When I still got him call texts for my little hometown, they would come in with like a 3 to 5 word description of the call. My favorite was, "Man stuck in mud." Story 60. Dear 911 operators reading this, I would like to formally apologize for 21-year-old me. I was drunk and dumb, and when the call connected to dispatch and asked what the emergency was, I know I shouldn't have answered 911. What's your emergency? With, there is no emergency, I am the Batman. It has bothered me ever since I sobered up the next day and realized I was a real hole to waste your time when there was likely bigger emergencies to worry about. My anxiety is also paranoid I kept you from saving a life. I sincerely apologize and am sorry. I also no longer drink, so there is that. Story 61. Preface. Dispatchers and members of public safety generally develop a dark sense of humor. You have to, or you'll go mad with depression. 2 that I remember were balls calls. One was a wife calling to get medical assistance for her husband. They had been having sex in the shower or edge of the bath, I forget. But she slipped and came down on his junk at a bad angle, and something went wrong. Okay, cool, let's get some info, ask medical questions, etc. This woman could not stop laughing. And I mean, it's a medical emergency and it's important, but saying junk on the radio, that's funny. But it was her laugh that had me struggling to stay on topic without cracking up on a recorded line. End of the event, the guy was transported. Ambulance called the center to get their start. End times and filled us in on the deets. The paramedic I was speaking to told me it looked like a pig ran around the house to be there situations, who knows. Story 62. This is truly embarrassing to me, but I'll share it with you all. Very recently, I actually called 911 in my sleep. I woke up right as 911 was ringing through on my iPhone. I woke up because my iPhone made a horrible warning, alarm sound immediately before the call went through. It was a total yikes moment. While I'll never know how I did it, I think this happened because of a particular iPhone emergency function and the fact that I frequently listen to something, like a podcast, to fall asleep. Whatever I listened to must have ended, and I, in a deep haze, must have started pressing buttons on my phone and... Anyways, when I woke up and realized what was happening, I was pretty freaked out. My WTF moment woke my wife up too, who was even more confused about what was happening. I then, in a nervous, surprised, but still somewhat tired haze, explained to the 911 operator what I think happened. While tired, I was also very sorry and made sure to tell this to the operator. The operator was thankfully very professional and forgiving. It was all still super awkward and embarrassing though. I also felt bad for wasting the operator's time. Story 63. I worked 911 for almost 6 years. Some favorites were, someone cut a hole in the fence for an emu preserve, and one named Curious George got loose and ran around on the freeway. My troopers then went in fake pursuit of him over the radio. A drunk guy ran up and called out, "I can help! I'm an emu wrangler!" Someone called in to report that they went to Arby's and it was out of roast beef, and that was really suspicious and we needed to come investigate. We handled dispatch for the state troopers, but also fish and wildlife. So one night, the local city PD transfers us a call for a mountain lion in a tree in a downtown city. The caller couldn't see it. They could just hear it growling. We have no fish and wildlife agents working that late, so we take the caller's info and grudgingly start working on figuring out who to wake up and call into service. A few minutes later, the city PD calls us back and tells us to disregard. They went to check, and it was a raccoon. A lady called to complain because a gas station refused to let her pay for a bag of chips with all pennies. A guy saw our electronic sign for an Amber Alert with the vehicle info and license plate number that said to call 911 if located and called us. Did he see the car that abducted the child? No, he just saw the sign saying to call 911 and called to let us know. Story 64. My first night at tech school, my phone somehow got lodged between the bed and the wall. It lodged just right to push the panic and side buttons on my iPhone. I jolted awake when it started to alarm and count down, and by the time I found it, the operator was on the line. They asked if I needed help, and in my dazed state, I just hung up. They call back and I told them there's no emergency, but they wanted my information for records, I guess. They asked my address and I had to say, I have no idea. I just got here. Because I was in a random dorm on a military base and very sleep deprived. He thought it was Seuss. I guess so he pressured me for more info and wanted to send a car. I panicked at the thought of police showing up to a large military dorm looking for me at 3 a.m. So I managed to finally convince him everything was totally fine by telling him I was totally safe and secure on a military installation. After about 20 minutes, we finally finished the call. My roommate, who was a serious idiot, complained all the next day about it and told everyone what happened. I slept with my phone on the floor for about 2 weeks after that. Story 65. A friend of mine was a 911 dispatcher. The funniest call he ever had was a woman who claimed she was locked inside of her own vehicle. After explaining to her where the door lock switch was, she was able to free herself. Story 66. One time, my family's 12 pounds Bichon tripped on a phone cord that yanked the phone to the ground. My mom, who was cooking at the time, noticed the dog walking on the phone. So naturally, she yelled, "I'm going to hit you, dog," at Corky before picking up the phone. Turns out the doggo called 911, and the operator heard at least part of the threat. So 6 cops showed up sirens and all demanding to search every room in the house. It was a good break from math homework. Story 67. 000 operator in Australia, ambulance only, but close enough. A mother calling for her child who lived on Porky Lane, who had been bitten by a pig. I had to mute myself so she couldn't hear me laughing. A guy calling about the enormous rotating sex toy that was currently lodged inside of partner. They couldn't turn it off. The best part of this was the calm, matter-of-fact way he explained the situation. Zero shame. Great stuff. The guy who called me from inside the back of a police divvy van after being arrested. That one took a while to work out because you have to ask for an address, and he's like, well, I don't know, they're going really fast. The many people who call from inside the emergency room at a hospital because they think they're not being seen fast enough. So they want us to send an ambulance to pick them up, to take them to the nearest emergency room, which they are currently in. Story 68. A man who called for ambulance at about 3 a.m. on a Saturday night. We arrived on scene and found our patient, a man in his 30s, sitting on the corner of his bed in a dark room, the best off the wall and tilted towards a dresser. It went something like this. Crew chief, sir, you called for rescue? Patient, yeah, I sat down after the shower and didn't turn on the light. Crew chief, realizing the bed has ornamental bedposts, IRCs. Right, so the Vaseline has got nothing to do with anything then? Story 69. I called 911 when I was 5 because our dog crapped on the kitchen floor. Evidently, it got a laugh from the dispatcher, but my parents weren't happy. It was 6 a.m., and I woke them with the cops on the phone. Story 70. My friend used to be a 911 operator and got a call that went something like this. 911, what's your emergency? I need to take a crap. Oh, what do you want me to do about it? Guy was about to crap his pants and wanted to ask where the nearest bathroom was. Story 71. My second oldest called 911 on his uncle once, many years ago, because uncle wouldn't let him watch cartoons. Police showed up, but of course, no action was taken. But we all got a good laugh, and then my son got a short lecture from the police about proper use of emergency phone numbers. Story 72. I once took a call from a man who stated his pizza had been stolen from his doorstep, and he was convinced someone in his building took it because he could still smell it. When asking the time frame of the pizza theft, he said within the last 4 hours. He ordered it and had it delivered and intentionally took a nap, leaving it out for 4 hours, unattended. He demanded police respond immediately to interrogate all of his neighbors. Story 73. Not a 911 operator, but my buddy he got a call from a woman reporting a live deer in her backyard, wondering what she should do. I don't know, Karen, just let it graze in peace. Story 74. Got a call from a woman who was very upset that her husband went to 711 and came back without her cigarettes and didn't give her a kiss. Wanted me to be sure to note that he had man titties, that she used to work for the CIA and spoke multiple languages. She did not. Fun lady. Story 75. At a preschool I used to work at, we had a 4-5-year-old come in with her mom's old phone. For some reason, it was still active, and she got pissed and called 911 because she wanted nap time to end early so we could play outside. The local cops thought it was hilarious. Her mom was not as amused. Story 76. Not a 911 operator, though I have a friend who's a dispatcher. She told me there was a call that came in from a lady whose 20-something-year-old son ran away from home after she forced him to get a vasectomy. My friend hasn't updated me about this tale, though. I hope the poor guy got away and found somewhere safe. Story 77. My grandfather doesn't think things through. The day before my grandmother was trading in her car, he thought it'd be funny to shoot a hole in the side of it. She never noticed and turned in her car to the dealership and was promptly detained by a security guard while the dealership owner called police. Well, wouldn't you know it? My grandfather was the dispatcher at the time and slowly realized as they were describing the vehicle, it was his wife. Story 78. Not me, but was told years ago. It was in the 80s Australia, about a lady who was pleasuring herself with the phone receiver and got it stuck and had to dial 000 for help. I've always imagined her screaming between her legs for help and being asked to speak up because I can't hear. Story 79. One guy calls and claims Dracula is his brother and Mickey Mouse is out to kill him. And a SWAT team needs to find Mickey before he uses a machine gun at Walmart. Mental illness is a git. Story 80. Not me, but someone I know is an ambulance in a rural part of my state. Someone called 911 for a bird stuck on a telephone pole. An investigation revealed it flew away. Story 81. I butt dialed and butt hung up on 911 while I was in class. When 911 called back, my cell made this incredibly loud beeping alarm sound, and I didn't realize it was me at first. I was so damn confused when I looked at my phone and saw 911 calling me. 911 operators of Reddit, what was the dumbest non-emergency you picked up? I've had so many, I can't even remember most of them. Two that come to mind instantly are: one, toddlers whose parents give them phones to play with which aren't connected to any service. Yeah, they still work for 911, and we can't call you back on them either. Luckily, the mapping system usually works pretty well to the extent that not only can I tell the address, but can often tell the officers which area of the house the calls are coming from. Two, dude called 911 because he got off a train at the wrong stop and was broke. Honestly, it wasn't even his predicament, so much as he was absolutely obnoxious about it. Even called 911 several more times. After I had already told him officers were rude. Annoying that he's tying up a line for medical emergencies. But that being said, I'm going to preach a little. If you honestly think you may have an emergency, but aren't sure if it qualifies for -9, 11 use, don't worry about it and just do it. And all emergency services personnel would much rather have much ado about nothing than have something terrible happen when it could have been prevented. This goes for all types of emergencies, situations. Also, do not underestimate fire. It grows at an unbelievable rate, and seconds can be the difference between life and death. The last major fire I worked, the caller called 911 and hung up on me after giving me her address. I called her back, at which point she tells me she came home to a small fire, but it's out now. I dispatched the fire department and told her, fire staff are on the way just to make sure. She said okay, in a tone like that's really not necessary, and we ended the call. She called back a few minutes later, very upset, telling me it wasn't extinguished after all. Ended up being a 2-alarm fire. Gas lines in the walls on fire from basement to attic. Fire staff said if I hadn't dispatched them when I did, the whole neighborhood would have gone up based on how woodsy and windy it was. Story 2. One caller was concerned for his safety when going outside his house because the neighbor a couple of houses down had his table saw out in his garage, and he was afraid the wind would blow the blade over to his house and injure him. I really need to start writing these down. Story 3. The damn things I can write. Been doing this for over a decade. The 3 that come to mind. My iPod broke, and had a guy call in a serious panic saying someone was trying to break into his house. He sounded super panicked, anxious. I heard loud knocking through the phone. The caller also threw in, I pay your damn taxes, now send the damn cops, I don't want to pass, etc. I could hear that constant loud door banging and a muffled voice. The guy then throws in, I just had pizza delivered here and now I have someone trying to break into my house. And then I could hear through the phone the delivery guy say, Sir, you forgot your change. Over and over. That was back in 2009 and still bothers me at the utter stupidity. Finally me, 911, police, fire, ambulance. Police, send the damn cops to address now, there's a serious emergency. Silence. Then suddenly, I hear tons of laughter from grown adults. Haha, don't actually send the cops, this is just a joke. I also heard in the background, I can't believe he really did it. The cops were already dispatched, and by the time they got to the house, they were not amused. Oh, my colleague, someone called 911 to report, a stranger called me a git at the train station. My colleague had to inform the caller that name-calling isn't a crime. Story 4. My grandma used to call 911 to have the fire department being her milk. She lived next to the fire department. She did this multiple times. Eventually, the fire chief gave her his direct line, and he brought her milk until she came to live with us. She passed away in 2004. My grandma was in early stages of dementia when this was happening, and it was a small-town fire department with the chief who had known her 30 years. Story 5. Guy called 911 before because he ordered a filet-o-fish from the drive-thru at McDonald's and it had ketchup on it. He was adamant about wanting the police to show up. His argument was that he worked at McDonald's when he was 16 and you don't put ketchup on filet-o-fish. He got the police all right, and a DUI charge. The second one, ooh boy, calls 911 from a payphone. 911, what's your emergency? I don't have an emergency. I didn't have quarter and I want to talk to a cop. Do you have $700? Huh? What are you talking about? Sir, 911 is for emergencies. You can be fined for misusing 911. Are you going to get me a damn cop or not? Sure. Yeah, he got the fine for it. Story 6. I have a court date coming up, but I have to go camping that day. What should I do? Reporting the moon missing. Advice on what kind of lotion to put on a sunburn. Anytime the power goes out, a ton of people call the police and report their power being out. They have CSAs about this crap all the time. 1 in 5 calls on some days would be people asking for police and going, "But I want non-emergency," or calling 911 to ask for the 10-digit non-emergency. Guy calling because he left his backpack inside of a U-Haul when he was moving. Story 7. When I was around 6, I was spending the day with my grandmother while my father was at work. She was preparing dinner for all of us and needed my father to pick something up on his way home. This was the age before cell phones were ubiquitous, and she didn't know his work number off the top of her head. But that's all right. I knew his work number. Now I was only 6, but I was pretty sharp for my age. So she just assumed that maybe I knew his work number. So she pulls me up on the tall chair by the phone and has me dial, and I do. 911, my father worked at fire dispatch, so I was technically correct. Anyway, a lady answered, and I asked if my dad was there. Not his name, just my dad. We get into a bit of a back and forth about how I called 911, and yeah, I know, my dad works at 911. Eventually, we do get my dad on the line. I think after the dispatcher asked my name. He asks to put my grandmother on the line. They talk for a bit, and that's that. Apparently, it happens from time to time. It wasn't a huge deal, and I wasn't in trouble. But my dad made sure to put the proper call line on my grandmother's speed dial, and he had to talk to me about how I can't use that number if it's not an emergency. Story 8. Caller. There is a shark in the ocean. Me. Yes, ma'am, that's where we keep them. Caller. I want to report a robbery. Me. Tell me what happened. Caller. I am at Burger King, and I ordered 6 chicken nuggets, but they only gave me 5. Caller. There is this light in the sky, out over the harbor. Me. Looking out the window from which I can see the area. Sir, that is the moon. Story 9. The news doesn't show how often people call for bees. It's daily. Was a 911 op for 7 years. Just some of them. Bacon was fake bacon, not real bacon on their fast food. Are homeless people allowed in the park? Someone called to tell us we don't need to use lights and sirens at night on our emergency vehicles because it woke up their baby. Broken heart. Asked for an ambulance. Not chest pains. It was a breakup that had just happened. Didn't like the way the neighbors threw out their garbage. Tons of calls about people being the wrong race in their neighborhood. Too much MSG in their Chinese food. Pretending that someone was being kidnapped, tying up several resources for almost an hour for an April Fool's prank. Our jurisdiction makes it very hard to get people in trouble for calling 911 even if it's for BS. Story 10. There are just too many. Others have already mentioned the calls asking for the non-emergency lines or the racist ones with people who don't belong. I think the one that takes the cake for me was the lady who called in about a male with a dangerous weapon. Frantic caller. I want to report a suspicious male. Me. Okay, where is he? Gets location. What makes him suspicious? Caller. Well, he's walking down the street carrying a dangerous weapon. Me. What kind of weapon does he have, and what is he doing with it? Caller. He has a snake. It's around his neck. Someone should do something. Me. Ma'am, a snake is not a weapon, nor is it illegal. With the new iPhone features making it easy to call 911, there have been many times I thought I was hearing a fight, only to realize it was just people having sex, and they bumped their phone too many times. Oh yeah. And the time Christian Grey called wanting a cop to come unlock his handcuffs because he accidentally used the real pair instead of the sexy pair. Story 11. There are far too many to mention, but the worst one was, the fuel pump won't accept my card told them it wasn't a police matter and hung straight up. The dumbest one was middle of one night. Bloke rang in a panic and said he was being burgled. Had walked to the bathroom in the middle of the night and seen a guy on the landing. Sprinted back to his bedroom and rang the police. 3 cop cars and a dog unit speed over to his house and do a sweep of the house. Couldn't find anything. When one cop asked him where he'd seen this guy, he showed him the hallway, which had a very large, full-sized mirror at the end. Turns out the guy had seen his own reflection in the dark. Needless to say, it caused a lot of laughter from the cops and in the control room, and a lot of embarrassment from the guy. Story 12. Where do I even start? My 2-year-old has a piece of toilet paper in her nose. I asked the waiter for no vegetables with my steak, and there's broccoli on my plate. My chair is trying to hit me. Older woman who would consistently lean too hard into her recliner and flip it. She strategically had her landline right there. 2 women called screaming so violently I was convinced they were being hitting. Their neighbor's ferret slipped under the door to their apartment. I could go on, but I'll give my favorite longer call. Caller. I had a lady friend over. I went to get us drinks. There was $400 on my dresser. Now she's gone, and so is the money. Me. Trying to get a description. What was her name? Do you know where she lives? Etc. Since he opened with saying he knew her caller. I'm not really sure. I can't remember me. You don't know your friend's name? Awkward pause. Do you want to find out and call back? Story 13. Our friend is a cop, well LT now. He remembers being called to a violent domestic disturbance. The person on the phone apparently lied. When he opened the door there, a woman started yelling about how her BF overcooked a pizza, and it was blackened and no good. The boyfriend's response was, it was a $3 cheapy store pizza and an accident. They started squabbling again, and our friend told them that wasting the police's time on something like this is wrong and lying about being hit and whatnot can get you in trouble with the police. The woman argued it was a big deal, and her BF needed to be arrested because he refused to give her $3 back so she could get another pizza. Needless to say, the officer tried getting their info since you have to make a report, but the lady ended up punching her boyfriend. Our friend grabbed the woman and told her to stop. Lady turned around and spit on our friend and called him a useless pig. Needless to say, she was arrested. Someone had told the cop a few weeks later that she filed a suit against her BF. $3 for the pizza and $1,000 for emotional trauma. Don't know if she won or not. Guessing not. The life of a police officer. Yikes. Story 14. United Kingdom. My friend works as a 911 operative. She had one guy call and tell her he was a vampire, and another who pretended he could see something happening outside that required armed response. She quickly called through to her line manager to explain she was pretty sure he was giving her details about an episode of The Wire, but they still had to send the armed response to an empty car park surrounded by high-rise buildings. Story 15. But not the operator. I'm the idiot that called. Years ago, my now husband was returning from a conference several states away in a rental van with a few other people. It was the middle of winter and an ice storm was about to hit our home city. Since he was in a rental, I was meeting him downtown as he didn't have a car there. I went to the building early because of the weather and camped out in the lounge where there were nice, comfy couches and no one else would be there. Our plan was to stay there until the weather got better the next day. It's around 4 a.m. and they get back to town, which, of course, is when the ice storm is hitting. I get a panicked call from my husband. We're just down the block. I need you to call 911 and tell them the car is about to slide off a cliff into the river. So I reacted in kind and call 911 and explain what's going on, that there's a car about to slide into the river. I poke my head out the door of the building and can see the van, sitting in the alley less than a block away. My husband and colleagues are crawling on their knees across the alley because they keep slipping on the ice. Then, after a few beats, I said, "Wait, I'm so sorry. I have no idea why I'm the one calling. I can see them now, and they are several blocks from the river, and I don't know what they're talking about when they said a cliff." The operator was nothing but professional. "Okay, ma'am. Is anyone hurt?" "An officer is on the way." "No, no one is hurt. I don't know if that's necessary. It's just very icy." "I understand. Tell your husband to call us back if they need help." Not a minute or two later, the cop shows up. We were downtown, so he was probably close by. He assesses the situation, slips on the ice, but catches himself and proceeds to drive the van away from the cliff and into a parking spot. By this time, my husband has made it into the building where I find out that the cliff was a 4-drop off the side of the road onto gravel. I'm surprised my eyes didn't pop out from rolling so hard. I felt so stupid for reacting instead of taking a minute to assess what was going on. Thankfully, the cop and operator were super chill about it. Story 16. On the iPhone, you can snooze your alarm by pressing the lock button. Coincidentally, you can also call 911 by pressing the lock button multiple times. I've done this twice now, and both times the guy on the line laughed at me. Story 17. Neighbor is a retired dispatcher. Latest great story is a lady called 911 to report a police officer blocking the road. She wanted him to stop blocking the road, and he wouldn't move. The problem? A boat in the road, taking up the entire road. She wouldn't have been able to get by. Never mind the huge crane there to lift the boat, also blocking the entire road with its outriggers. And the trailer the boat was going on, also sitting nuts middle of the road to be loaded. But she called 911 to tell them to make the cop move. She had a hair appointment, and she was going to miss it if he didn't let her by. But she's going to sit there and call 911. Also, we have seals in the harbor I live near in winter sometimes. And I'm sure we'll have one this winter. And when it leaves, someone will call 911 to ask where the seal is. Also, if the seal is sleeping, someone will call 911 to tell them the seal is sick. Story 18. I know a few 911 operators, and they tell me that they consistently get 911 calls to make sure it works. Clearly, in this day and age when idiots seem to rule, this needs to be said. 911 does indeed work. You'll find out when the cops arrive at your door and give you a blast of crap for being among the most stupid people in the nation, and hopefully a hefty fine as well. Story 19. When my daughter was 5, she spent a week with my dad. He gave her an old iPhone to play with. He said he got a kick out of it because she has been fake talking to someone all week. Well, towards the end of the week, she handed the phone to him and he played along and said hello. It was a 911 operator. She had been calling all week to chat with them. They weren't mad, but wanted to let my dad know that out of service, iPhones can still call 911. Story 20. Honestly, that's about half of what 911 is. I use a wrist rest for my keyboard, so when I head desk during some stupidity, I have a good cushion and don't accidentally concuss myself. I fear the future of video 911. Not because I'm worried about what I'll see, but because I have very expressive hands and I feel like people would get upset if they watched me practice my Jedi skills on them. But one that is both very dumb and has knowledge everybody might benefit from. are people who call from right outside a hospital or after already being in the waiting room. They either want to go to a different hospital because they don't like the wait, how they've been treated, or want to be brought back to the same hospital in an ambulance. Here's the thing. Emergency ambulances aren't taxis, and they will take you to the closest hospital, able to provide the level of care you need. And whenever you get to the emergency department, regardless of how you got there, you will be triaged by a nurse and treated in order of urgency. You don't get any bonus points on your triage based on how you got there. And if you check in a second time, you're a new patient. So you go from a non-urgent who has been waiting for 2 hours to a non-urgent who is at the bottom of the waiting list. And spoiler alert, the closest hospital able to provide the level of care you need is almost always the one 50 yards away with the nurses you almost certainly got crafty with before you stormed out to call 911, but an ambulance will be happy to bill you for the drive back to see them. One more, because I have never understood the thought process, are people who call 911 to report fires that our units are already on scene and the person calling can see them. We always want to make sure they're not reporting a second fire, so, "Sir, do you see the fire engines there?" "Oh yes, I just wanted to make sure you all knew about it." Are there like roving bands of fire engines just out fighting fires vigilante style? Head meet, wrist rest. Story 21. I'm in military police, so stupid calls are common. This one really blew my mind amongst the others. We have a guy who's a traditional reservist in our unit for almost a decade and has to drive several miles for each drill weekend. That being said, he has to stay at the on-base hotel. The dumb git is incompetent enough as it is and knows the non-emergency number by heart. He's gotten himself locked outside the room once that night and called us non-emergency. It's almost 2 a.m. We hear the 911 emergency phone go off. As we pick it up, it's him and says he got himself locked out the room. Story 22. 1. 2 a.m. Hello, there is a hedgehog in my garden. And? He doesn't belong there. 2. You need to come here quick. What's the situation? There is a bird in a tree that giving me a weird look. So, you are telling me you can interpret the look of a bird? Story 23. I called 911 by mistake one time when I was trying to call internationally. Since at work you had to dial 9 to get an outside line, I did that out of habit and fat-fingered something else. Then I heard the voice answering. When I realized it was emergency services, I quickly said, "Oh, that was a mistake. Sorry, there's no problems here." I thought I was clear, but 5 minutes later, the small-town cops were at the door. My stepkids wanted to know why the police were there, so I told them it's okay, and to go to their rooms. The cops did not like this. "No, it's okay. You guys stay right here." Finally, after asking us all questions, they went on their way. I'm glad they checked up and talked to the kids, but man, that was embarrassing. Story 24? So many that it's hard to pick the dumbest. My favorite, though, 60-year-old lady called because her husband ejaculated on the recliner and forced her to sit in it. She wanted to know if she would get pregnant. I gave her my honest opinion and then transferred her to the jurisdiction she was in and listened to another dispatcher go through the same conversation. Police were dispatched to check the welfare. The dumb part to me was that she thought she could get pregnant. Story 25. Did 911 dispatch for a county in Central Florida for about 6 months while I was waiting for my real job to pick me up. We were police side, night shifts, from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Thing that blew me away was that we had regulars, as in people that just called 911 sometime around 4 in the morning, usually drunk, usually because they'd been kicked out of a bar. Sending the cops out to arrest them was an obvious waste of time. So you'd usually tell them you were going to call the 7, 11, and tell them to stop selling them beer if they didn't stop calling. One guy's name was Ryan, forgotten the others. This was 16 years ago. Then there were the crazy ones. A lot of this guy's trying to shoot me with a gazer. Combination gamma ray and laser, as it turned out. Didn't ask about the physics. Best one started at about 2 a.m. and ran until almost 5. Woman lost in woods. Woke up, didn't know her name or where she was. Said she'd been abducted. This was pre-smartphone. Some providers, you got a great location. Others might be a mile radius. This was the latter. It was February, abnormally cold year, so hypothermia was a concern. Ended up with 2 hellos looking. This county had 3. Numerous cars and fire trucks out searching. So finally, one of the ground units finds her car. Vehicle totaled, yellow paint down the side. About a mile back up the road is the school bus farm where they park all the county buses. Go to check it and yep, someone hit half the buses in there. Get the bloodhounds on her trail and they find her in a drainage pipe, hiding from the cops. Concussed, lost, but aware enough to know she didn't want to be found. She was your average Central Florida chronic drunk. Story 26. I don't work for an emergency answering service, but I still have a stupid story. I live in Switzerland, and some trains have compartments which should be made available for the elderly or disabled. They are equipped with an emergency button which alerts 911 when pressed. One time late at night, I decided to sit in such a compartment since the train was completely empty. Plus, there's more space, and I am quite tall, 6 feet 2 inches. I listen to music with my headphones. Naturally, I wept my legs to it. Because of my height, my knee kept pushing the emergency button when I wobbled my legs without me noticing it. In addition, I didn't hear how the call went off because I had activated the noise-canceling function on my headphones. At the next station, 2 rescue workers stormed the train, expecting to find an elderly person who probably suffered a heart attack or something since she didn't answer. I would have rather sunk to the ground than give them an explanation why they only met a completely healthy teenager. Luckily, they were pretty understanding, and I only had to pay a small bill, which was partly even covered by my insurance. Since this incident, I never ever sat down in such a compartment. Story 27. Paramedic here. I have been called out for a grown man who hit himself shaving. It had stopped by the time we arrived. I taught him the toilet paper square trick. He still wanted the $40 taxi ride to emergency. Called out for a 2-year-old with hand-mouth-foot disease, common viral disease that causes irritating pustules. Mother called an ambulance because her 2-year-old didn't want to go to the hospital. Had to explain to the mother that she is the decision maker and that she can simply pick the baby up and place her in the car seat even if she fusses. So she did. This was a 911, lights and sirens emergency call out. Was called out because an adult had a nightmare. Was self-aware of this fact, still called 911. I've forgotten hundreds of silly, non-emergent, fail-to-adult calls for everyone I remember. All you can do is be helpful, respectful, educate in a non-condescending way, all the while wondering how they survived life all these years. Story 28. I'm an ambulance. We get called to a house approximately 30 minutes away from our station, almost in the next county, for a complaint of an 18-year-old feeling strange. Dispatch is unsure what exactly to tell us since the complainant has hung up, so we don't know what to expect when we arrive on scene. We get to the house, walk up to the front door, knock on it, and when it's opened, we are greeted by a living room full of teenagers eating pizza and high as a kite, giggling like idiots. The place reeks of weed. The caller is in the kitchen and tells us that he called because he's always wanted to see what the inside of an ambulance has looked like, while my partner is asking him if there's any real medical emergency. I inform dispatch over my radio that this is going to now be a law enforcement issue. We tell the kid that this was a waste of an ambulance meant for emergencies only, and he seems to have no regret. Story 29. So many, but I'll try to keep it short. 1. Parents who call on children for not listening or throwing tantrums. I mean kids 6 and under. Had a guy call 3 times in a night for his son, and he got mad at me for telling him to use the non-emergency number and not 911. 2. Karens not getting their way. One lady wanted to speak to officers because the people she was harassing were sassy with her. That being sassy is not against the law. Another guy called in about employees calling his girlfriend fat and telling them to leave the store. His full-grown girlfriend was trying to ride in the small store cart, and employees said she was too big for it and to get out of it or leave the store. A male Karen called Aprox 20 times in a few hour span, screaming about a homecoming dance music and that he pays taxes and they shouldn't be allowed to have dances and other nonsense. 3. People doing the nasty. I don't know why, but seems like it's really hot for some people to call 911 while doing nasty things. I hate hearing it and I feel bad sending officers, but we have to. There are many more, but I think this is good for now. Story 30. Not exactly a 911 dispatcher, but I used to dispatch medical helicopters. Caller. Why is Life Flight following me? Me. What? Caller. Why is the helicopter following me? Me. It must be lost. Caller. Will take me off the list. Me. Sure thing. Spoiler. The helicopter was in fact not following this crazy Lady El Mao. Story 31. People have called 911 for parking complaints. Those always piss me off. Also, right during the start of pandemic, this lady called to make an animal complaint, and she was completely convinced that the dog that stopped to pee on the boulevard was spreading the virus. I could literally go on all day long if you let me, but these two are first that come to mind. Story 32. I got a call from a man demanding a police officer because the water from his neighbors and ground sprinklers was hitting his connected lawn. It wasn't saturating it or anything. Literally, just part of the spray of water hit maybe 2 square feet of his grass, and he was furious. If you ever wonder why police take forever to respond to a call, there is a good chance that they are tied up dealing with people like this. Story 33. So once someone spoofed my husband's, at that time BF, phone number, called 911 and reported a DV situation in a town about 3 hours away, gave no address or info, just he's beating her kind of thing. What happens? Cops show up at our door and wanted to arrest my BF for DV because I had a massive black eye and our apartment was trashed from a party the night before. They started asking me about if I was okay, etc. I was super confused. I worked in a kitchen at the time and was super clumsy. The black eye was from dropping something on my foot and then smashing my own face off the corner of a prep table trying to pick it up. I have very poor spatial awareness sometimes. The whole mess took like 3 hours to figure out. I'm grateful officers were dispatched, on the off chance I called or someone who knows us did. They dispatched officers in the other town too, but IDK if anything was actually figured out. Story 34. Not directly 911, but we assist them. I got a call once that went like this. I got a call about a low battery life. I was hoping to get more info. Well, it looks like you have a sensor that has a low battery. Yeah, but what does that mean? It means a sensor has a low battery and needs to be changed. Oh, okay, thanks, I'll change it next week. Okay, have a good day. Story 35. Got a call for a rat running around a shelf in the caller's room. Keep in mind, I take my job seriously. Everyone's call is an emergency to them, I'll respect that. This is the only call I've almost broke on and laughed. She had a thick accent and was on the verge of tears, and I was struggling to understand her. Eventually, after much confusion, she spells out M-O-U-S-E and mimics a mouse laugh, something like mahehe. And I about lost it. I had to mute my phone and stand up. The mouse impression was like nothing I've ever heard, just so visceral and out of left field. She was so afraid of this mouse, though. We did send over an officer to clear the house for her. I stayed on the phone with her until responders arrived and comforted her, ensuring this wasn't a dumb call to make and that our officers would be happy to help. I still have that recording saved. It makes me happy every time I hear it. Story 36. It was my aunt. I had a tree climbing phase as a 2-year-old and she was terrified of heights. Even standing on top of a chair was a lot for her. So she called 911, screaming at the top of her lungs. I was at the top of a tree and I was about to plummet to my death fire. Truck comes flying over in record time, like 3 guys ran into the backyard and just stood there dumbfounded. I was sitting on a branch on a juvenile tree that was well within reach for a tall person. Hell, an average-sized person could have reached me with a chair. I was sitting there watching my aunt sob and scream, hysterically rolling around. On the ground, still on the phone with 911, while my siblings and cousins she was also babysitting, sat there watching her while drinking Hawaiian punch. So while a guy tried to calm my aunt down, a guy reached up, picked me up off the branch, and put me on the ground. My aunt ran over, scooped me up, and squeezed me like I'd just been in life-threatening danger. My uncle was not amused at the bill they got over this incident. Story 37. I answered police calls in the UK, had one come through on 999, where a woman was reporting that a neighbor had forced the caller's 8-year-old son into eating 4 or 5 pears that he had shaken off her tree. It was really difficult to keep a straight voice and really difficult to know how to classify that from the predefined categories on the system. In the end, I went with antisocial behavior, and dispatch sent a PCSO to calm her down. Story 38. I called a non-emergency line once while a bit manic and left a message to let them know we would be filming my friend's Mustang for an amateur film, and that if they got reports of loud noises or speeding, it was for a film, and we were being careful. I stuttered through most of it, but I gave them my phone number and first and last name in case they needed to verify. It wasn't until I hung up that I just pre-admitted to a crime and gave them our exact location and contact info. I never got a call and none of us got arrested. I just imagine someone got into the office early one morning, listened to the voicemail, and had a good laugh about stupid kids doing stupid things. Story 39. The sheriffs had shut down a major road because there was a fatal head-on collision. It was clear that something major was going on because the whole sheriff's department, as well as a ton of fire, rescue, ambulances were there. We got so many calls saying the road was closed, like we didn't know. The girl who answered the initial call about the crash took another call about the road being closed. I could hear the person on the line screaming and cursing at her that it was inconvenient for them that they had to wait while the road was closed. She was usually very calm and collected, but that person pissed her off. She responded, "Yeah, and the road is closed because people just damn pass on it. I'm sure his family thinks that's really inconvenient too." We also had a mentally ill woman who would call us regularly. She allegedly was missing an arm and would always threaten to beat us with her amputated arm. Story 40. So I am not a 911 operator, but I did work in an ER in a LV2 trauma and first contact hospital. Basically, 911 calls us and basically asks where to send the patient. So dispatch contacts the hospital and reports. We've got a 56-year-old female complaining of problems. Sorry, dispatch didn't quite get that. What is the chief complaint? Chief complaint is problems. Problems? Problems. What kind of problems, dispatch? Chest pain, shortness of breath, fall, trauma, abdominal pain. What's the problems? Just problems. She refused to elaborate. Send her to not our hospital. We isn't dealing with that. Story 41. Slight reversal on my part. My dad was a village bobby in small village in the Scots borders. We lived in a bungalow that had an office and cell attached. When the phone rang in the office, 4-year-old me would run through and grab the phone, "Hello, Tata," and put it back down. He reminded me every time we met anyone new for years afterwards. Story 42. My wonderful nephew, who has physical and intellectual disabilities, called 911 because the cat stole his piece of chicken. Because he can't really speak, they must have heard basically grunts and groans as he tried to tell his story. They got to his house and found out everything was okay, and he enjoyed the attention from the officers who responded. Unfortunately, they had to teach him to not call 911 after that because he called 3 or 4 times after the first time because he wanted to see his new friends. Story 43. Dispatched for a 200-square-mile district with under 70,000 people, so even the main city wasn't very densely populated. Got a call one night on 911 from a guy who wanted animal control dispatched. Convo went like this. Caller, there's a raccoon! Me. Where is the raccoon? Thinking we might be able to send someone if it's trapped inside or something. Caller, in my front yard, he's in the tree. Me. I think that's where raccoon lives, sir. Caller, but I live in the city. Raccoons can't live in the city. Me. I don't think the raccoon can read the city limits sign. Story 44. An operator visited my internship program last summer to talk about his career and answer any questions about the profession. I asked him this very question, and then he told the story about a stupid lady who called 911 because there was a turtle on her lawn multiple times. Story 45. Calls 911 to report a massive natural gas leak in their house. Is told to evacuate everyone from structure. Multiple police officers and fire engines rush over. Police arrive first. Cops start chuckling and tell caller to not worry. Caller refused to believe the officers when told that the gas leak was in fact skunk spray that happened in the yard. Insisted the FD check every room in the house. After it was wrapped up, one of the more patient officers spoke with the caller and found out they had moved in recently, and this was their fifth time ever smelling skunk because they had always lived in very urban areas and had just relocated to the suburbs. Story 46. I've got to pick just one? We have an appliance repair shop in the middle of the town where I worked, and as an advertising gimmick, the owner has a set of dummy legs dressed in boots and pants inside an old washer. A lady calls in on 911 panicking because she just drove by the shop and there's a man stuck in a washer in the parking lot. I politely explained to her that it's a dummy which just pisses her off and makes her double down. On her insistence that it's a person and we need to do our jobs. The legs are standing up at a 90-degree angle and perfectly stationary. There's really no way to even think that it's a person. Story 47. As a translator for a cruise line, sometimes I man their operator, where the 911 line comes through, aside from the usual, my remote is not working, and my toilet won't flush. The cake probably goes to people complaining about ship movement. I've had one a while back, with a vessel coming to Miami from Europe. This lady would call fuming, demanding the captain slow down. We tried explaining that it's mostly rough sea and strong winds that makes the ship rock, meaning the speed adds very little. But she's been on 5 cruises before, so she knows better. I'd legit put the phone down, talk to myself for a couple of minutes, and get back to her saying the captain would try his best. She'd call about twice a day. Fun. Story 48. I was a social worker, and I witnessed a truly stupid call to 911. It was during a safety check. I had to drop by the house randomly while the dad was visiting with his daughter. I get there and was informed that the police were called. The dad's brother, who was a little person, was upset that the dad took the wheels off his bike and put them on his niece's bike. I waited until the police arrived, and they had a stern talk with the adults in the house. Story 49. I'm not the 911 operator in this story. I'm the child. As a child, I bit an X-Mass light. It shattered in my mouth and my mom freaked out. I hadn't swallowed any of it though, so she has me spit out the pieces and rinse my mouth with water and spit to get any small shards. This is when she decides to call 911, after solving the problem herself. I'm pretty sure the operator hung up on her the first time. After the second call, they sent a fire crew and they looked in my mouth, didn't see any glass, and gave me a teddy bear. Story 50. I've picked up a ton of them that ask for taxis, lifts, a ride from an officer. But honestly, the one that took the cake was I received a call from an intoxicated Native American that wanted to report a removed person. He said that 2 women were in his apt, and they were drunk and throwing cigarette butts on his carpet. Once officers arrived, they removed them both. One of them had a warrant, and they took her in. But once they looked through his apt, there was a giant bag of weed sitting in open view from the door. Needless to say, he was arrested as well. Side note, weed was still a controlled substance at the time. Story 51. I'm Scottish, so it was 999, but a few spring to mind. 1. My 8-year-old won't get in the bath. Can you send an officer out to tell her she needs to? 2. During bird flu. My dog just sniffed a dead pigeon and then sneezed. I think it has the bird flu. 3. I just left my groceries on the bus. Can you send a car to intercept it, please? Story 52. I don't answer the phones, but I do work on a frontline ambulance, responding to 999 calls. Got a call for anaphylaxis in a 30-something-year-old, so we sped over there, preparing our plan for treatment so it can go nice and smoothly. Get in there. The guy is sat on his sofa absolutely fine, breathing normal, no swelling or any symptoms at all. Turns out he was frightened he was going into anaphylaxis because he fell into some stinging nettles several hours before and was worried because his arm was coming up in a painful red bumpy rash. How I didn't laugh in his face still amazes me. Story 53. Dumbest in that someone could have been hurt. 12-year-old calls to say someone broke into his house. Parents are away. He grabs his younger sister and hides in the closet where parents keep guns. He explains his dad taught him how to use the guns and is aiming the gun at the closet door. They live way off in the middle of nowhere. It was Halloween and the parents went to a party. Had the brilliant idea to come home and scare the kids. Kid ended up realizing who it was by hearing the parents laughing to themselves as they snuck through the house, having no clue how bad things could have gotten. Story 54. I was the caller, and my brother and I were genuinely confused. Our neighbor's donkey had escaped and was in the middle of the road, in the dark, and we almost hit it, and so did the guy in front of us. When you start a 911 call with, I don't know if this is an emergency, the palpable irritation in the you receive an answer is completely understandable. But, someone's donkey is in the middle of the road. Oh, yeah, where? They were as genuinely baffled as we were. Story 55. We have a 911 line and a separate non-emergency line. Both of these came in on the 911 line for reporting emergencies. 1. A fairly distraught caller complaining that someone was feeding the geese too much bread at the park. 2. A call wanting police to investigate the empty Amazon package on the side of the road in case it was stolen. Facepalm. Story 56. I had a call from a person speeding and driving very erratically on the road. Deputy flips on lights and sirens attempting to pull the car over. The driver of the car called 911 to check if they were really being pulled over, if it was a real cop pulling them over, and did they really have to stop. Needless to say, the person on the phone was obviously drunk, and I had to explain that yes, they were getting pulled over so they needed to stop the car. Story 57. Mother calls in to let us know that she is leaving her 10-year-old daughter at home, alone because she did not behave in school, and could not go to the movies with the rest of the family. She goes on to say that if her daughter calls 911 to just ignore it, because she's known to make things up. Once I managed to pull my eyebrows back down to their normal position, I calmly explained to her that if her daughter calls 911 for any reason, we are going out to that house and she will be fined for leaving her there alone. Story 58. Had a guy call at like 3 a.m., whispering. He and his wife had stayed up drinking. She had passed out on top of him, and he couldn't get up and could barely breathe. She was 400 pounds and he was 150 pounds. They had just moved from out of state, and he didn't remember his address and couldn't reach any pieces of mail, and was calling from a cell phone in the days before smartphones. That was a fun one to figure out. Story 59. I'm not an emergency worker, but I have one where I am the caller. When I was 3, my parents worked nights cleaning offices. My oldest siblings were old enough that we didn't need a babysitter. I wanted a bedtime story, but no one would read me one. I used the phone in our parents' room and called 911, asking them to read me a bedtime story. They called back and asked my sister if she had a little sister. 911 will not read you a bedtime story? Story 60. Gracious, I could go on and on and on. The most common for me seems to be people calling 911 because they're just not feeling well. Absolutely things they could go to the urgent care or their primary care doctor for. Most recently, I had a guy call us because he wanted to go to the emergency room for a pandemic test and he didn't have a ride. Absolutely zero complaints. Said he sneezed a couple of times. Ambulances aren't taxis. CVS sells pandemic tests for like $20. There was a CVS less than a mile away from him. Story 61. Recently, I had a lady call and ask if we could have a unit house sit while they went on vacation a few days. She offered to let them sleep in the house, eat the food in the fridge, take the dog out, etc. She got mad when I told her that's not something we could do. She'd have to ask someone else or hire help. She threw a fit and said I didn't understand anything. Oh well. Story 62. I used to take 999 calls in the UK. Worst calls that I can remember off the top dot of my head. Pizza delivered with wrong topping. Picked up trousers from dry cleaners and they weren't clean, and the caller had a job interview the following day. Ran out of beer at house party, and to save anyone drink driving, could we deliver some? A bird flew into the house and won't leave. A bird crap on their head. Different call to above. Story 63. Caller. The doors to the Circle K are locked and I don't see anyone inside. They're supposed to be open 24 hours a day. Me. Sometimes they do that when they need to use the restroom. Just give it a couple of minutes. Caller. I've been standing out here for 10 minutes. Me. Sometimes it's more than pee. Story 64. There are so many, I don't know where to begin. I've had quite a few people who call because they've locked their keys in their car or house and want the fire department to come out and open the door for them. No call a locksmith. My partner took a call from a lady that was full on hysterical because her boyfriend stubbed his toe. Had a lady who dreamt she called 911 for an ambulance and wanted to cancel them. Those are just a few. Story 65. I had a woman who thought she called the number on the TV to order a derma wand. Called right back, and I answered again, making it clear to her that not only did I not sell derma wands, but she was also tying up an emergency line with her phone calls. The third time, she yelled at me, blaming me for her being unable to purchase this junk. Though her disregard for others' emergencies didn't deserve the kindness, I looked up the derma wand number and gave it to her. Story 66. Guy's friend drank half his beer and refused to pay for it. At first, I thought it was a bartender, but it was a private residence. Other guy was supposed to go in half, owed him $9. Officers dispatched because the guy said if we don't get the cops there, then they'll need to send an ambulance. I wish I knew what happened after. He hung up after I told him they were dispatched instead of staying on the line. It wasn't in the news, so guess it got de-escalated. Story 67. I wasn't the 911 operator, but the lady called 911 first, and then animal control, who then connected her to me in the wildlife department. The lady was a school principal. The school was having an assembly, and a hummingbird flew into the auditorium. And this lady frantically evacuated the place and was hysterical about how animal control wouldn't help, because this is such a dangerous situation. This lady legit thought that the 5-gram bird was like a flying dart that would skewer people's eyes if they got too close. Story 68. When my grandma was still living alone, she was somewhat of a repeat offender for this. Once, she was on a walk and found a dead bird on the sidewalk. She had to call 911 because what if it was bird flu? Worse yet, after receiving her non-driver ID, she noticed the expiration date was like 20 years in the future. This alarmed her greatly, for some reason, and called emergency services to explain to her why her personal identification was good for so long. Story 69. I worked emergency medical in the military and got my share of stupid calls. My favorite was a spouse calling saying, "I'm leaving the country on vacation tomorrow and I need a few vaccinations." Or "I won't be allowed to enter country." This call was at 2 a.m. The ER doesn't just give out vaccinations. Needless to say, she screamed at me. I laughed. My officer in charge laughed. Story 70. My grandma had a crush on the sheriff, and the local police station was right down the street from our house. She called a lot, but mostly she would call on me if I misbehaved. I remember one time my grandma called because I wouldn't go to sleep, even though I was in bed the whole time just not willing to sleep. They showed up and talked to me, and it freaked me out. But she kept doing it, and eventually they picked me up.